So let's talk about the common myths about fertilizers.
So these are Nutrigrow Solutions fertilizers, and they're very specific. Some of them are very tiny pellets, others are granular, some is a mixture with colors, and some of them are flakes. But all of them have a very specific task to letting the plants grow. And growing some big plants is very easy with specialized fertilizers. But not all fertilizers are the same. Some are very specific, like the Pro line from Nutrigrow Solutions is very specific for fast growing and big plants that only need a lot of nitrogen, especially in the first stage of growing. And then we have hydroponic fertilizer, which is also very specific because it has to be very clean. Otherwise it's going to clog up the system with calcium or magnesium or residue. It's going to build up over time and the system doesn't work properly anymore and the plants are going to die. And when the plants are very expensive, it's going to cost you a lot. So fertilizer and the choice which fertilizer you're using is very important. The next big thing in the world of fertilizers and myths is that organic fertilizers are always better. Yeah, that's just not true. A lot of companies, especially with companies which have a lot of marketing behind them, are using a crowd to come up with names and trigger words for selling a product. So organic, biological, eco style, all those words are trigger words that catch your eye and it has a nice ring to it, but it doesn't really mean anything, because when something is organic it has only a carbon component in it. Other companies, they create fertilizers and they call it bio/logical or bio or eco product, and they're calling it eco style, but the style of economics I don't know, because a lot of people think it's organic, and not everything that you buy in organic form is really organic or less toxic for the environment. A mineral-based fertilizer, and this is food fuel, is considered to be in the same category as food grade minerals, because we're using minerals that have lab grade and food grade qualities. Therefore there's less toxins in it, there's no pesticides, there's no fungicides in it, but also the heavy metals are very low, and therefore we have a rating of 99.9998% or something like that. Products are very specific and we want to have the highest quality and the highest purity of fertilizers, because a lot of people eat this stuff or smoke it, and you don't want to inhale toxins or heavy metals like arsenic, mercury, chromium or lead. Yeah, you don't want that in your food and don't want to smoke it. So the quality of products of Nutrigrow Solutions have to be verified and the minerals have to be very pure before we introduce it in our fertilizers. These days we have the capability of testing fertilizers for toxins, pesticides, fungicides, but also heavy metals, and a lot of companies are, well, hiring us. But we see a lot of, well, shocking results, and 1,000 times maximum amount of pesticides, fungicides or heavy metals is just way too much. But they're still selling the stuff because it's not really registered or regulated in some countries, and therefore they can use it. So organic fertilizers, it's a beautiful name if you're making it yourself. It's a beautiful way of growing if you know what you're doing, but it doesn't really say anything, because a lot of times organic fertilizers are way more contaminated with pesticides, fungicides, heavy metals, well, how you call it in English when you vaccinate a cow, those medicines and all that stuff that's put in the ground eventually. So both fertilizers, organic and mineral-based fertilizers, have their demons, and you have to make a choice between which one works for you. But the myth around that organic fertilizers are the best fertilizers, PFOS, heavy metals, pesticides, vaccines, rubber, plastics, all that stuff that you find in a garden, especially with people that grow only organic, it's just because it's introduced through organic fertilizers, not because they walk around. The next and a very common myth, that's actually not a myth, that's actually the truth, is that bottled fertilizers or watered down fertilizers, and that's actually the truth because it's between 70 and 90% water, and therefore you're buying a lot of crap. I really don't recommend it. And if you want to make your own bottled fertilizer, buy Fruit Fuel or Proline and put in 70% water and the rest fertilizer, and you have some watered down fertilizer, you can mix it and use it yourself, but you don't need to really buy bottled fertilizers. The next thing is that some people think that mineral-based fertilizers are damaging the planet. Where do you think this stuff comes from? It's not like an alien landed on the earth and provided some minerals. It's provided by the earth. But there is a slight truth in it. When you use an excess of fertilizer, it doesn't even matter if it's organic, biological, mineral, synthetic fertilizers, it can be damaging for the soil. It can damage bacteria, it can damage the funguses. So an excess of fertilizers always are damaging. But when you use fertilizers as they should be used, guess what? They're just fertilizers. The next myth is that all fertilizers can be sprayed on the leaves of plants, and that's actually the worst advice that I've ever heard on the internet, especially on TikTok and Facebook, because not all fertilizers are designed for foliar spray. For example, if you're using something like Fruit Fuel, you make a dilution of, well, exactly like the feature says, and you spray it on the leaves. Within a couple of days you have brown leaves and the plants are gonna die. This stuff is specifically designed for bottom feeding, so in the soil or hydroculture, but not to spray on the leaves. So these days a lot of videos on TikTok say that you have to dilute fertilizer to a certain point and you can spray it safely on the leaves. But it's not really true. Fertilizers like Fruit Fuel and even from other companies which makes similar fertilizers, they have to be introduced in the soil or through hydroponics to the root system. If you spray it on the leaves, because some of the components, the minerals, have the capability of killing off chlorophyll or damaging the leaves themselves, and it doesn't matter how much you dilute it, and if you dilute it down to a point that's safe for spraying on the leaves, it's most likely not going to work at all anymore. So using a product that's specifically designed for bottom feeding and spraying it on leaves, yeah, I wouldn't recommend it at all. So there are fertilizers that have been designed for foliar spray. Calimox or calcium fertilizer is one of them that's specifically designed for spraying on the leaves, because a lot of times that plants have calcium deficiencies. You cannot introduce any calcium through bottom because it's way too wet, and that's one of the problems, that there is a calcium deficiency. So when you introduce Calimox through spraying it on the leaves, it's getting absorbed and the plants get a fresh dosage of calcium. But it's specifically designed for foliar spray. And the last myth is that you have to absolutely check the pH. It doesn't matter if you grow in soil or in hydroponic system, you have to check it. And that's actually not true. In commercial greenhouses, yeah, I would recommend it because it will increase between 3 and 5% more fruits on the plants. But for a home grower, yeah, it's first of all way too much work, and second, a pH meter, it's not very cheap. Also, you have to change it every 6 months. So you have to buy something that costs a couple of €100 and then you have to change it every 6 months. It doesn't make any sense. So for the home grower, I do not recommend it if you grow in soil. But when you grow in hydroculture or hydroponic systems, that's a different story. In hydroponics, your pH should be somewhat around between 5.5 and 6. but you don't need to buy those very expensive pH meters. So you can use those little test strips, and it has a simple range in it, and it works fine. It works actually so fine, it doesn't really make a lot of sense to me to use those very expensive pH meters, those pens that commercial growers are using, because they're using it on millions of plants, because the water that runs through the system, those are thousands and thousands of gallons at once. And yes, when you run so much water through it, you need to check it constantly, otherwise yeah, you're gonna get lost of product, especially between 3 and 5%. Over a million plants, it's gonna make up a lot of product. But when you grow a couple of plants, and it doesn't matter if you grow the plants that you eat or the plants that you smoke, it doesn't really make a lot of sense to me, especially when you're growing in soil. In hydroponics, it's very simple. Just get a test kit or pH strips and check your water. And if the water is in a certain range, it should perform fine. So I know that some companies are saying that their fertilizer only works in a certain pH range, otherwise you have complications and problems and all that stuff. But guess what? If a company says it has to work between 6.1 and 6.15 or something like that, it's a crappy product. It's a crappy designed fertilizer. Because fertilizers should work in each range throughout the system for soil or hydroponic. By the way, I'm not saying that checking your pH doesn't make plants perform a little bit more, because some minerals are only absorbed in a certain pH range, but fertilizers should perform even under some crappy conditions and even when the pH is not perfect.